The wilderness is unforgiving, a place where the rules of civilization fade, replaced by something older, something that does not care for human comfort or understanding. In the vast, untamed expanse of Yellowstone National Park, beauty and danger exist side by side. Towering pines whisper with the wind, geysers hiss from beneath the earth, and the rivers carve their way through ancient stone, untouched, eternal. People come here for adventure, for escape, for a chance to lose themselves in nature's embrace. Some find their way back. Others do not. I've worked as a park ranger for years, watching over the land, protecting both the visitors and the delicate ecosystems they wander into. Yellowstone is a place of wonder, a testament to the wild world before us, but it is also vast, isolated, easy to get lost in, and sometimes people disappear. Some are found, shaken but alive, their stories full of confusion and gaps in memory. Others, well, that's what we're here to talk about. The thing about the wilderness is that it doesn't owe you anything. It does not care how experienced you are, how prepared, how sure you are that you know what you're doing. It doesn't care if you're a seasoned hiker with years of survival training, or a first-time camper just looking to get away from the noise of the world. It doesn't care if you're alone or in a group, if you have a map, a satellite phone, a detailed itinerary left behind for friends and family. Out here, none of that matters if something decides you don't belong. Over the years, I've seen things I can't explain. I've heard stories pass between rangers that never make it into official reports. The kinds of things that don't fit neatly into a search and rescue log or an incident report. The kinds of things that, if you mention them to the wrong people, will get you a knowing look and a warning to let it go. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Here, we share true accounts of the unsettling, the unexplained, the things that linger just beyond what we can easily rationalize. Before we begin, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know if you've ever had a strange experience in the wilderness. And a fair warning, what you're about to hear is deeply disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This story is not one I tell lightly. It is not a ghost story, not a campfire tale meant to thrill or unsettle. It is something else entirely. Something that has stayed with me. Something I cannot forget, no matter how much time passes. It started with a call, a missing camper. It happens more often than people think. Yellowstone is over 2 million acres of rugged, unpredictable terrain. People come here to test themselves, to escape, to push boundaries. Some come prepared, others less so. The ones who make it out usually have a story to tell. The ones who don't, they leave behind something else. When we got the report, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. A group of campers had gone off trail, something we strongly advise against, but people do it all the time. They'd been out for 3 days, expected back the night before. When they didn't return, one of their friends, who had stayed behind at a different site, called it in. This is how these things start. A simple call, a missing person, or in this case, a missing group. The assumption in the beginning is always the same. They got lost. Maybe an injury slowed them down. Maybe bad weather forced them to hunker down somewhere. But then the details start adding up, or more often, not adding up at all. We followed their planned route, hiking the trails they had mapped out in their itinerary. It should have been simple. They weren't supposed to be deep in the backcountry, not the kind of place where people vanish without a trace. But when we got to their last known location, something was off. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned supplies, no tracks leading away in a panic. Their campsite was abandoned, but not in a way that made sense. Their tents were still standing, their gear left behind in a way that suggested they had just walked away. Food still sealed in bear-proof containers. backpacks resting against logs, untouched. Even their fire pit looked like it had been prepared for use, but never lit. It was as if they had planned to return, as if they had only stepped away for a moment, but they hadn't. We searched the area, calling their names, checking for any sign of movement in the dense forest beyond the site. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower. The feeling of something being wrong only grew stronger. I've been on dozens of searches before, and there's a certain rhythm to them, a logical sequence of events, a way things usually unfold. But this wasn't right. Then we found the first body. I will never forget the way the forest felt in that moment. The shift in the air, the silence, heavier than it should have been. The way the light seemed to dim, even though the sun had not yet set. And that was only the beginning. The first body was found not far from the campsite, just beyond the tree line, partially concealed beneath a thick tangle of undergrowth. A young man, early 20s, his name later confirmed from the IDs we recovered. He was sprawled on his back, his face turned toward the sky, frozen in an expression of something I still don't have words for. His mouth was open, his lips parted like he had been mid-sentence when whatever happened. His eyes, wide, unblinking, held none of the peace that sometimes comes with the end. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no obvious wounds. Just stillness. But it wasn't the way he died that unsettled me. It was his hands. His fingers were curled, stiff and unnatural, as though he had been clawing at his own throat. His nails, caked with dirt, had been broken in places, and the skin along his fingertips was raw, like he had been scratching at something. But there were no wounds on his neck. Nothing to suggest what had caused him to react that way. We called it in. Protocol. The rest of the team widened the search area, hoping, at that point, still hoping, that we would find the others alive. But in my gut, I already knew the truth. The second body was found a few hours later, slumped against the base of a tree farther into the forest. A woman. Same age, same wide, frozen eyes, no wounds, no sign of a struggle. Her fingers were the same, raw, broken, as though she had been clawing at something unseen. Then we found the carvings. They were etched into the bark of the surrounding trees, deep and precise. Symbols, shapes that didn't match any known language or marking, common in the park. Some of them looked hastily scratched, while others were carefully arranged, almost ritualistic in their precision. I remember running my fingers over the grooves, feeling the rough, jagged edges. Fresh, recently cut. And then, beneath the symbols, something else. A name. One of the hikers. We didn't find the others that day. Not whole, anyway. 4 days earlier. They arrived at the park like so many before them. Excited, ready for adventure, eager to escape the noise of the modern world. 5 of them. College friends, all in their early 20s, taking a break from their routines to explore the deeper, more isolated trails of Yellowstone. They had done their research, planned their route. They were experienced enough to know the basics, how to store food to avoid bears, how to navigate, how to respect the land. But none of that mattered in the end. Their destination was a lesser-known part of the backcountry, a section of the park that, while technically accessible, was rarely traveled. The kind of place where cell service is non-existent, where the world feels untouched by time. They wanted solitude. They wanted wilderness. By the second night, they had found it. Their campsite was a clearing just off a small creek, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only the faint glow of their fire to push back the darkness. They laughed, shared stories, let the night settle around them. Then, the whispers started. At first, it was subtle, a rustling in the trees, the kind of sound you can easily blame on the wind. But then, it became more distinct. Words, barely audible, threading through the night air. Not loud enough to make out, but just enough to let the mind wander, to plant the seed of unease. They turned their lights toward the forest, scanning the trees. Nothing. The sound stopped, but the feeling didn't. One of them, a guy named Evan, joked that it was just their imaginations getting the best of them, that the isolation was making them paranoid. It was the kind of thing people tell themselves to push away the nagging, instinctive fear of the unknown. And for a while, they convinced themselves it was nothing. Until the whispers came back. Closer, this time, surrounding them. They called out, demanding to know if someone was there. No answer. The fire flickered, and for a moment, just a moment, the shadows between the trees seemed wrong. Deeper than they said, have been shapes that didn't move like animals, that didn't belong to the shifting branches above. Then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling their camp just beyond the reach of the firelight. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting, movement that never fully revealed itself. They shined their flashlights into the trees, but the beams seemed weaker than they should have been, swallowed up by the darkness in a way that light shouldn't behave. That was when they decided to leave. They weren't amateurs. They knew when to listen to their instincts, and something about that place, about the way the night pressed in on them, told them to go. But as they packed their gear in frantic movements, one of them, the girl we later found against the tree, stopped. She was staring into the woods, pale, motionless. "There's something watching us," she whispered. They turned, scanning the trees again, seeing nothing. But the whispers. The whispers didn't stop this time. They only grew louder, more distinct, less like the wind and more like voices speaking in a language they didn't understand. Then, just before they could leave, they saw them. The carvings, freshly cut into the surrounding trees, their names. They ran. What happened next is pieced together from what little was found, from the things I saw when we finally reached the site. They fled into the night, leaving behind everything but their flashlights. They ran without direction, without thought, just the desperate need to escape whatever was in those trees. They didn't make it far. We never found the remaining 3 bodies, only fragments. Shreds of clothing, pieces of torn flesh, scattered in a way that no known predator could have done. No bear, no wolf, no mountain lion leaves remains like that. The official report? Inconclusive. Cause of death? Undetermined. But I know what I saw, and I know that the forest still whispers at night. Yellowstone has its share of stories. Some are passed down from ranger to ranger, whispered around campfires, or spoken in hushed tones over late-night shifts. Some of them are exaggerations, no doubt, embellishments over time, the way any good legend takes root and grows. But then there are the ones that don't fade, the ones that don't change much, no matter how many years pass, no matter who tells them. This is one of those stories. I wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened to me. It was late, just past midnight, when I got the call. A routine check-in from dispatch, letting me know there had been a report of a lone traveler seen walking along one of the more remote service roads in the park. Normally, this wouldn't be anything unusual. People wander off trails all the time, get turned around, end up places they shouldn't be. But what made this call different was the location. The stretch of road in question was miles away from any designated campsite or visitor area. No trailheads nearby, no backcountry permits issued for that region. Just an empty, winding road cutting through miles of untouched forest, and whoever had reported the sighting was certain. This person was alone. No vehicle, no flashlight, just walking. I remember sighing, rubbing the exhaustion from my eyes. I had been on shift for nearly 12 hours already, and the last thing I wanted was to drive out to some isolated road in the middle of the night. But duty is duty. If someone was lost, they needed help. So I went. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. Out there, miles from the busier parts of the park, the silence feels heavier at night. The headlights of my Ranger truck cut through the darkness, illuminating the endless stretch of trees lining the road. The moon was only a sliver in the sky, barely enough to cast shadows. Then, up ahead, I saw him. A figure walking along the shoulder, head down, hands shoved into the pockets of a tattered jacket. I slowed the truck, pulling up alongside him. Rolled down the passenger window. "Hey there," I called out. "You all right?" He didn't respond at first. Just kept walking, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. I felt a prickle of unease. Something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost mechanical, didn't sit right. "Need a ride?" I tried again. "Park's closed for the night. Can't have people walking out here alone." Finally, he stopped, turned to face me. I won't lie, something about looking at him set me on edge. His face was off. Not in a way I could immediately explain, but something about it felt wrong. His features were normal enough, young, maybe mid-20s, with hollow cheeks and dark eyes that looked far older than they should have, but his skin was pale, unnaturally so. And his clothes, they looked outdated, like something someone might have worn decades ago. "Yeah," he said finally. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Yeah, a ride would be good." I unlocked the passenger door, watching as he climbed in. He moved stiffly, like every motion took effort. The truck suddenly felt smaller, the air inside heavier. "Where you headed?" I asked as I pulled back onto the road. "North," he said simply. I nodded. "That's a pretty long walk from here. You camping nearby?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window. "Not camping," he murmured. "Just trying to get home." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I kept driving, watching him from the corner of my eye. The road stretched on in silence, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of trees outside. The further we went, the worse the feeling in my gut became. Then I noticed something. His hands. They were clenched tight, resting on his knees, the knuckles bone white, fingers rigid. Like he was forcing himself to stay still. "You sure you're all right?" I asked. This time, he didn't respond at all. And then, he was gone. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. 1 second, he was there, sitting in the passenger seat beside me. The next, nothing. The seat was empty. The door had never opened. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking as I reached out, running my fingers over the seat, as if touching it would somehow confirm what I already knew. He had been there. I had seen him, spoken to him, and now he wasn't. I stepped out of the truck, scanning the road, the trees, half expecting to see him standing there, watching. But there was nothing, just the silence of the night. I called it in, told dispatch I had lost visual on the subject. I didn't tell them the truth, not all of it anyway. What was I supposed to say? That a man had just vanished into thin air? That I had picked up a hitchhiker who, by all logical means, should not exist? They sent another ranger out to assist, but by the time he arrived, there was nothing to find. No footprints leading away from the truck, no sign that anyone had been walking on that road at all. The next day, I started digging, checked old reports, archives, anything I could get my hands on, and that's when I found it. The first recorded sighting was in 1974. A ranger, driving the same stretch of road, had picked up a hitchhiker fitting the exact same description. a pale young man in outdated clothing walking alone in the dead of night. The report ended the same way. The ranger claimed the man vanished mid-drive. Then another report, 1982, then another, 1996, 2005. Different rangers, different years, same story. No explanation. I don't drive that road at night anymore. And when I hear reports of a lone traveler walking along the shoulder, I don't respond. Because I know what's waiting out there. And I know that some ghosts never find their way home. Yellowstone isn't just a place of natural beauty. It's old, older than most people realize. And with age comes history. Some of it is written down, preserved in books and plaques, but some of it lingers, trapped in the spaces where time seems to fold in on itself. This is one of those stories. It starts with a man named Daniel Greaves, a traveler from Michigan, who had come to Yellowstone looking for peace. He wasn't much of a camper, preferred the comfort of four walls and a warm bed, so he had booked a few nights at one of the historic lodges within the park, the kind of place that's seen generations of visitors, the kind of place that creaks in all the right ways. He checked in late, sometime after sunset. The drive had taken longer than expected, and by the time he arrived, the lobby was nearly empty, save for the night clerk behind the desk, a woman who looked like she had worked there a long time. She greeted him with the usual pleasantries, took his payment, handed him the key. And then, for just a moment, her expression changed. "You're in room 306, she said. Daniel nodded, pocketing the key. A pause. Just a second too long. "If you need anything," she added carefully, "just call the front desk." He didn't think much of it at the time, just took his bag, made his way upstairs, found his room at the end of the hall. It was a nice enough space, modest, but comfortable. A single bed, a small writing desk, a window overlooking the trees. And yet, the moment he stepped inside, he felt it. That weight in the air. The kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Like walking into a space that doesn't quite belong to you. But he was tired. Brushed it off. He set his bag down, took a hot shower, and climbed into bed, hoping for a good night's sleep. It didn't take long for the noises to start. At first, it was subtle. The sound of something shifting, just beyond his range of focus. A floorboard creaking when no one was moving. The quiet click of the closet door, even though he hadn't touched it. He told himself it was an old building, that was all. Old buildings creak. They settle. It was nothing. But then came the whispers. He couldn't understand the words. They were soft, just beneath the threshold of hearing, threading through the darkness like voices carried on the wind. He turned on the bedside lamp, scanning the room, but there was no one there. Still, he didn't sleep. The air had changed, grown colder, pressing against his skin like the breath of something unseen. The kind of cold that doesn't come from faulty heating or an open window. The kind that seeps into the bones. The whispers didn't stop. At some point, exhaustion won. His body gave in. Sleep came, restless and uneasy. And then something pulled the blanket from his body. Daniel woke with a start, his breath caught in his throat. The room was dark. The air was wrong. He could feel something there, standing at the foot of the bed. He didn't move, didn't breathe. And then he saw it. A figure, tall, unmoving, just a shadow against the deeper darkness of the room. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then the whispering stopped, and the figure took a step forward. Daniel lunged for the bedside lamp, his hands shaking so badly he nearly knocked it over. Light flooded the room. Empty. There was nothing there. But the closet door was open, and he was certain absolutely certain that he had closed it before going to bed. That was enough. He didn't care how exhausted he was. He grabbed his bag, yanked open the door, and marched straight downstairs. The night clerk was still at the desk. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You were in 306, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. The woman exhaled, rubbing a tired hand over her face. "That room. It was closed for a long time," she admitted. "We don't usually book guests there. Not unless we have to." Daniel stared at her. "Why?" Another pause. "There have been stories," she said. "For years, people seeing things, hearing things. Some leave in the middle of the night, just like you." Daniel swallowed. "Who was in that room before me?" he asked. The night clerk hesitated, then finally, "No one," she murmured. "Not for almost 20 years. Daniel didn't ask anything else. He left that night. Didn't care that he had already paid for the room. Didn't care that it was late, that he had nowhere else lined up to stay. And when he got home, curiosity got the better of him. He started researching the lodge. Room 306. The first record he found was an article from the 1950s, a small, barely noticeable section in an old newspaper, mentioning a guest disappearance. A man had checked into that room one evening. By morning, he was gone. No signs of forced entry, no luggage left behind. Just gone. Then another story. 1979. A housekeeper quit without warning, claiming she had seen something crawl out of the closet in that room. A ranger stationed at the lodge reported seeing a tall, shadowed figure standing in the third-floor window. The problem? That room had been locked for years. The reports went on and on. Whatever was in that room had always been there. And maybe it always would be. There's something about the wilderness that makes you believe in things you wouldn't otherwise. Spend enough time out here, in the deep, dark places where the land has stayed untouched for centuries, and you'll start to feel it, that creeping sensation that you're not alone, even when you know logically that you are. But sometimes, you aren't alone. And sometimes, whatever is with you has been there far longer than you can comprehend. This is one of those stories. It started when a park ranger named Evan Mitchell moved into an on-site housing unit with his wife Laura and their 6-year-old daughter Lily. The house itself was old, one of the original structures built for park staff decades ago. It had been renovated over the years, updated enough to be livable, but at its core, it was still the same weathered, time-worn place it had always been. Evan had heard the stories about the house before they moved in. Little things. People claiming the place felt strange, that guests never stayed long, that doors had a habit of opening on their own, that footsteps echoed at night when no one was walking. But he was a rational man, a park ranger, trained to deal with real-world dangers. The idea of a house being haunted was laughable. At first, things were normal. The house creaked in the wind, the pipes groaned when the temperature dropped, typical quirks of an old structure. Laura even joked about it, calling it charming. But then, they started noticing. The attic. The entrance was a simple pull-down hatch in the hallway ceiling, the kind with a wooden ladder that unfolded when you yanked the cord. And from the moment they moved in, something about it felt off. They never heard anything coming from up there, not really. No distinct noises, no heavy footsteps or dragging sounds. But there was an unease that settled whenever they passed in a pressure in the air. Then small things began to happen. Objects moved. A book that had been left on the coffee table one night would be found on the kitchen counter the next morning. Keys that were always placed by the door would end up in strange places. Under the couch, inside a cabinet, It was easy to explain away at first, absent-minded mistakes, forgetfulness. But then, Lily started talking about the man in the attic. At first, Evan and Laura brushed it off as childhood imagination. Lily had always been a creative kid, full of wild stories. But one night, as Evan was tucking her into bed, she asked, "Why doesn't the man in the attic ever come down?" That stopped him cold. "What man, sweetheart?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Lily shrugged, yawning. "The tall man. He's always up there watching through the little slats." Evan felt his stomach tighten. "There's no man up there," he said carefully. Lily just gave him a sleepy, knowing look. "Not now, but he's there when you're sleeping." That night, Evan lay awake long after Laura and Lily had fallen asleep, staring up at the ceiling. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't. But the words "he's there when you're sleeping" sat heavy in his mind. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the attic creaked. Not from the wind, not from the house settling. It was a deliberate sound, a slow, weighty shift of something moving directly above him. Evan sat up, his breath caught in his throat. For a long time, he listened. Nothing. The next morning, he told himself it had been his imagination. He went to work, went about his day, but a gnawing unease clung to him. That night, he stood beneath the attic hatch, staring up at it. And that's when he saw it. The cord. The pull-down cord that had always hung loosely in the center of the hallway was swaying. Slightly. Barely noticeable. But it was moving, like someone had just let go of it. Something inside Evan snapped. He grabbed a flashlight and a step stool, yanked the cord, and pulled down the attic ladder. It unfolded with a reluctant groan, a breath of stale air drifting down from above. Laura woke up then, groggy and confused. "What are you doing?" "Checking the attic," Evan muttered. She blinked at him. "Why? What are you—" A thud cut her off. Both of them froze. It had come from above, from inside the attic, a slow, dragging shuffle. Evan's grip tightened on the flashlight. He climbed the ladder. The attic was small, filled with decades of dust and forgotten storage. Old furniture covered in sheets, stacks of weathered boxes. The air was thick, suffocating, but there was nothing there, at least. Nothing alive. But in the farthest corner, he found something strange. An old, leather-bound book. A journal. The name on the cover was faded but still legible. Ranger Thomas Calloway. Evan climbed back down, heart pounding, and flipped open the first page. The entries were old, dating back to the 1950s. But as he skimmed through them, one thing became horrifyingly clear. Thomas Calloway had lived in this same house, and he had experienced the same things. The whispers, the moving objects, the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Then, near the end of the journal, one entry stood out. I finally saw it. I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved. It's tall, too tall. It bends when it stands in the attic. Its limbs are long, fingers dragging against the floor, and it watches. It always watches. Evan slammed the book shut. He and his family left the house that night, never returning. Days later, he looked up Ranger Thomas Calloway. The man had disappeared in 1958, vanished, without a trace. And the last place he had been seen? Inside that house. Yellowstone is vast, millions of acres of wilderness, sprawling into places where few, if any, people have ever set foot. Even with all the rangers, the campers, the tourists, there are places that remain untouched, places where time doesn't seem to move the way it should. And sometimes, when people go missing out here, they're never found. Sometimes, it's as if they were never here at all. This is one of those stories. It started with a phone call. Ranger Mark Hansen had been working at Yellowstone for nearly a decade when it happened. He was seasoned, experienced. He had seen all the usual dangers: bears too comfortable around people, lost hikers who had strayed too far from the trail, reckless tourists who underestimated the brutal indifference of the wild. But he had never seen anything like this. It was late, after midnight, when the first call came in. Mark was in his cabin on site, half asleep, when the landline rang. It was an old thing, a relic from before cell service had expanded through the park, rarely used except for emergencies. "Groggy," he answered. At first, there was nothing, just static, crackling like distant radio interference. Then, "Mark!" The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the static, but it was familiar, too familiar. Mark sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. "Who is this?" A long pause, then just barely audible. "Don't go to Twin Pines." Mark's blood turned to ice. The line went dead. He sat there for a long time, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the empty dial tone. It had sounded like Ranger Sam Carter, but that was impossible. Sam had disappeared 6 years ago. Mark had known him well. He was a good ranger, sharp, experienced, the kind of guy you could trust in the backcountry. Then, one day, he was just gone. He had been out on patrol, sent to check on a remote area near Twin Pines, a stretch of dense forest that few ventured into. He had radioed in once, a routine check-in, then silence. They searched for weeks, found his truck, found his backpack near an old trailhead, but they never found him. No body, no sign of struggle. It was as if he had simply vanished into the trees. And now, 6 years later, his voice had just come through the phone. Mark tried to tell himself it was a prank, some sick joke, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The next day, he checked the call logs. No record of an incoming call. It had never happened, except that it had. A week passed. Then the second call came. Same time of night. Same crackling static. Mark. His heart pounded. Who is this? A pause. They watched from the trees. The line went dead. Mark didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had made up his mind. He was going to Twin Pines. He didn't tell anyone, didn't report the calls. He just geared up and drove out there, following the same route Sam had taken 6 years ago. Twin Pines wasn't an official campground, not anymore. It had been abandoned years back. Too many accidents, too many people getting lost. The forest there was dense, far thicker than the surrounding areas, with old-growth pines towering so high they blocked out most of the sunlight. Mark parked near the rusted remains of the old trailhead sign and started walking. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his own breathing. Then, something else. A whisper. Faint, drifting through the trees like a thread of wind, but it carried words. Mark. He turned sharply, scanning the forest. Nothing, but he could feel it now. A presence, something just beyond the edge of his vision, lurking in the thick shadows between the trees. Then ahead of him he saw it. An old ranger station. It wasn't on any of the current maps. It had been left to rot years ago, buried in the heart of Twin Pines. Mark had heard rumors about it, how it was shut down after a series of disappearances, how no one went near it anymore. But there it was. The door hung slightly open, its hinges rusted. Mark swallowed hard and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Dust-covered furniture sat untouched. A desk, an old cot, a filing cabinet half eaten by time. And then, the radio crackled. Mark froze. It sat on the desk, an ancient piece of equipment long out of use. But as he stared at it, the static deepened. And then, through the speakers, "Don't turn around." Mark's blood ran cold. The voice was right behind him. He spun, flashlight cutting through the dark. Nothing. Just the empty doorway, the silent trees. But something had been there. Something had been watching. His heart hammering, Mark backed out of the station, his instincts screaming at him to leave now. That was when he saw the footprints, leading away from the station. Fresh. Too fresh. And they didn't belong to him. They led deeper into the woods. Mark followed, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The trees pressed closer, the air growing heavier with every step. The footprints continued until they stopped, abruptly, like whoever had made them had just vanished. Mark stood there, breath heaving, his skin crawling with the overwhelming sense that he was being watched. Then his radio crackled. "They took me." The voice was so quiet, so broken, that Mark almost didn't understand. "They live in the trees." The static cut out, and suddenly, Mark knew he had to get out. He turned and ran. Branches tore at his clothes, shadows twisted in the corners of his vision. The forest seemed deeper than before, the path stretching longer than it should have. And then, a figure, standing at the tree line, tall, motionless, watching. Mark didn't stop to look. He ran until he burst back into the clearing where his truck was parked, gasping for breath. The trees behind him felt alive, like they were breathing. He left Twin Pines that night, never spoke of it. But the calls stopped, and though he tried to push it from his mind, one thing still haunted him. Sam Carter had called to warn him, but whatever had taken him all those years ago had never let him go. The Yellowstone wilderness has secrets, places that aren't on any maps, trails that lead to nowhere and everywhere all at once, structures that shouldn't exist, yet, for brief moments, do. This is one of those stories. It started with a routine patrol. Rangers Daniel Owens and Eric Vance had been assigned to check out reports of strange lights deep within the backcountry, beyond any designated campsite or known landmarks. Normally, such reports could be dismissed campers getting lost, reflections playing tricks on the eyes. But something about this one was different. The report had come from a seasoned hiker, a man who had spent years navigating Yellowstone's lesser-known trails. His voice, when he called it in, had been shaken. "There's something out there," he had said. "A building, a hospital, I think. It wasn't on my map. It shouldn't be there." Then, before they could ask more, the line went dead. So now, Daniel and Eric were out in the wilderness, following his last known GPS coordinates. The hike was brutal. Thick trees, uneven ground, miles away from anything resembling civilization. And then, just as the sun dipped low over the treetops, they saw it. A building. It shouldn't have been possible. They had studied every topographical map before setting out. There was nothing out here. No old ranger stations, no remnants of cabins, nothing but untouched forest. And yet before them stood a massive decaying structure, 3 stories tall, its windows dark and empty, its brickwork covered in creeping ivy. A rusted iron fence encircled the perimeter, its gate hanging open as if inviting them inside. The sign near the entrance was cracked and weathered, but they could still make out the words, "St. Mary's Sanitarium." A cold chill settled over them. This place wasn't just old, it felt wrong. Eric shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't possible." Daniel agreed, but he wasn't about to leave without getting answers. They stepped inside. The air was stale. The scent of mildew and decay clung to every surface. The inside of the building looked like something from a nightmare, peeling wallpaper, rusted gurneys abandoned in the hallways, shattered glass crunching under their boots. Wheelchairs sat motionless, their wheels caked in dust. An old nurse's station loomed in the center of the lobby, its files scattered as if someone had left in a hurry. But the strangest thing? It didn't look like a place that had been abandoned for decades. It looked like it had been used recently. Paperwork still sat on the desks. An old clipboard lay on the floor, filled with patient names and treatment logs. A half-eaten meal, mummified with age, rested on a tray near the hallway. Like whoever had been here had vanished in the middle of their routine. Then, a sound. A distant, echoing click, like a door slowly creaking open. Daniel and Eric froze. The building had been silent when they entered. Now, it wasn't. Eric whispered, "We're not alone." Daniel shined his flashlight down the hallway. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on something that made his stomach drop. A figure, just for a second. A person thin, frail, dressed in a faded hospital gown, standing at the end of the corridor. Then, gone. Vanished the moment the light touched them. The hair on the back of Daniel's neck stood up. Eric muttered, "Tell me you saw that." Daniel nodded. He had. They pressed forward, deeper into the asylum. The farther they went, the worse it got. Disembodied whispers curled through the air, just soft enough that they couldn't make out the words. Shadows shifted in the corners of their vision. Then, as they reached a set of double doors, labeled Ward C, the air changed. It became heavier, charged with something unnatural, and then, a voice, right behind them. "Help me!" They spun around. Nothing. But as their flashlight swept across the hallway, they saw something new. The wheelchairs. They had moved. No longer scattered, they were now perfectly aligned along the corridor, all facing in the same direction. Toward them. Eric let out a shaky breath. "We need to leave. Now." Daniel agreed, but as they turned back the way they came, the whispers grew louder, urgent, desperate, and then screaming. A high-pitched, agonized wail erupted from every direction at once. Lights, long dead, sputtered to life in a sickly, flickering glow. The sound of running footsteps pounded from the floor above them, and then a door slammed shut right next to them. Eric grabbed Daniel's arm. "Go!" They ran. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The asylum groaned around them as if the building itself was alive. Figures moved in the glass reflections. Gurneys rolled across the floor on their own. And then, the front doors were there. They burst outside, lungs burning, gasping for air. The moment they crossed the threshold, the noise stopped. The asylum stood silent once more. Still, empty, as if nothing had ever happened. They ran until they reached their truck, speeding back to the station, breathless and shaken. Neither of them spoke of it that night. But the next morning, when they tried to show the others where the asylum had been, it was gone. No building, no sign it had ever existed. Just untouched forest. As if St. Mary's Sanitarium had never been there at all. Yellowstone has its predators. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. But this was something else. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. The first report came from a pair of campers, a young couple, experienced hikers who had set up camp deep in the Pine Barrens. A remote, heavily wooded section of the park that few ventured into. They had planned for a quiet weekend. Just them, the trees, and the distant sounds of the wild. But what they got was something else entirely. They had turned in for the night, nestled inside their tent, the fire reduced to smoldering embers. The only sound was the occasional hoot of an owl. Then, the silence. Not just quiet, dead silent. No wind, No insects, no rustling leaves. A silence so absolute it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Then the footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, like something massive was moving just outside their tent. The couple lay frozen, barely daring to breathe. Then, a sniffing sound. Deep, guttural. Something was smelling them. The boyfriend, heart hammering, reached for the flashlight. He clicked it on. The beam shot through the thin fabric of the tent and illuminated a massive shadow. Something tall. Too tall. Hunched over, yet still towering above their tent. Then, just barely visible through the fabric eyes. Glowing, red eyes. Not the reflection of a flashlight, not an animal's eyeshine. These were lit from within. Burning, watching, and then the claws. A massive, clawed hand pressed against the side of the tent, its fingers longer than any human's, the tips sharp and hooked. The girl screamed, and just like that, it was gone. The couple burst from the tent, shining their light wildly into the trees. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the overwhelming sense that they were still being watched. The next morning, they found the footprints. Enormous, clawed, deep in the soil. Whatever had been there was real, and they weren't the only ones who had seen it. By the time the report reached the ranger station, the story had already spread, and it wasn't alone. Other hikers, some who had never met each other, were reporting the same thing. A towering, shadowy figure, red eyes, that unnatural silence before it appeared. Ranger Ben Dawson had been skeptical at first. He'd heard his fair share of tall tales, Bigfoot sightings, skinwalker stories, things that could be explained away by overactive imaginations and the tricks of the wilderness. But this? Too many reports, too many details lining up, and then the clawed footprints. That was when he knew this wasn't just a campfire story. He and two other rangers, Chris and Elena, set out to track whatever was lurking in the Pine Barrens. They hiked for miles, deeper than any of the sightings had been reported, looking for signs. For hours, they found nothing. But then, the forest went silent. That same unnatural silence the campers had described. Elena whispered, "Something's wrong." Ben felt it too. The air was heavy, pressing, like the weight of an unseen presence had settled over them. Then a snap in the distance. A branch. Something big was moving. Chris raised his binoculars, scanning the trees, and then he froze. His face went pale. Elena whispered, "What? What do you see?" Chris didn't answer. He just slowly lowered the binoculars and whispered, "It's watching us." Ben turned, heart pounding, following Chris's gaze. And then he saw it. A figure. Far away, yet somehow too close. It stood at the edge of the trees, just at the line where the shadows grew thickest. Tall. Too tall. At least 8 feet, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur. Its shoulders hunched forward, as if it had spent too much time crawling on all fours. And then, the eyes. Burning red, locked onto them, watching, unblinking. Elena exhaled sharply. "That's not a bear." Chris took a step back. "We need to move. Now." They started to retreat, slow, careful, keeping their eyes locked on the creature. But then it moved. Not walked, not ran, it shifted. One moment it was at the tree line, the next closer, too fast. Like the space between them had collapsed in an instant. Chris cursed under his breath. "Go! Go!" They turned and ran. The trees blurred past them. The ground sloped unevenly beneath their feet, but behind them, the footsteps. Heavy, fast, getting closer. Ben dared a glance back and immediately wished he hadn't. The thing was gaining, bounding forward on all fours now, its limbs moving in a way that didn't seem natural. didn't seem human, didn't seem real. The truck was in sight. 50 yards, 30, 10. They threw themselves inside, slammed the doors shut. Elena jammed the keys into the ignition, hands shaking. The headlights flared to life. And for a split second, the creature was right in front of them, its face inches from the windshield, its mouth grinning, a twisted, lipless thing stretching too wide across its face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Then it was gone, vanished into the trees, as if it had never been there. The three rangers sat in stunned silence, their breath ragged. Then the forest returned to normal. The sounds of birds, the rustling of trees, the wind through the leaves, like nothing had ever happened. But when they checked the ground outside, the clawed footprints were still there, and they were heading toward the mountains, as if whatever was lurking in the pine barrens was just passing through. There are things in the wilderness that defy explanation. Sometimes it's a set of tracks that lead nowhere. Sometimes it's voices in the trees when no one is there. And sometimes it's yourself. The first sighting ranger, Matt Calloway, had been working at Yellowstone for nearly a decade. He knew the park like the back of his hand. Every trail, every clearing, every hidden grove that most visitors would never find. So when he saw himself walking through the woods one evening, he assumed his mind was playing tricks on him. It was late, just after sunset, when it happened. Matt had been finishing a final patrol, checking on a backwoods trail that had been closed off due to bear activity. He was alone, his radio crackling with occasional updates from the ranger station. Then, just up ahead, on the very path he had just walked, he saw himself. Another him, walking the same trail, wearing the same uniform, moving with the same casual but focused stride. Matt stopped cold. The figure was about 20 yards ahead, its back turned to him, walking in the same direction he was headed. Matt's mind raced. How? He had just been there. No one else had been on this trail. And yet, there he was, walking ahead, as if he had somehow stepped outside of his own body. Then, the figure stopped. Didn't turn, didn't move, just stopped. Matt took a slow step forward. The sound of his boot crunching against the dirt echoed too loud in the unnatural silence. Then, the figure turned its head. Not its whole body, just its head. Slowly, too slowly, until its face was visible over its shoulder. And Matt felt his stomach drop. Because it was his face. But wrong. The eyes were too wide. The mouth was stretched just slightly too far. And then, it grinned. A perfect, eerie copy of his own expression, but with something off. Something malicious. Matt's blood ran cold. Then, it ran. Straight into the trees, moving faster than any human should. Matt didn't chase it, didn't even move. He just stood there, heart hammering, watching as the copy of himself disappeared into the darkness. The second sighting. Matt didn't talk about it, not at first, but then things got worse. The next morning, he walked into the ranger station only to be met with confused stares from his colleagues. Ranger Elena gave him a puzzled look. "I thought you were already out on patrol." Matt frowned. "I just got here." Chris, another ranger, chimed in. "No, we saw you leave like an hour ago. You even said you were heading toward Cascade Lake." Matt felt his stomach twist. "I was at home. I just got here." Elena and Chris exchanged uneasy glances. Then, the radio crackled. Static, then a voice. His voice. "Station, this is Calloway, checking in from Cascade Lake, all clear." Every hair on Matt's body stood on end. The radio had come from inside the station, from his own patrol radio, still clipped to his belt. Elena turned pale. "Matt, that was you." But Matt was right there, holding his radio, and he had never left. The investigation. By now, Matt knew something was terribly wrong, and the more he looked into it, the stranger things became. Late one night, he dug into old ranger logs, searching for anything, any incident that sounded like what was happening to him. And that's when he found it. An entry from 1996. A ranger named Jacob Marsh. A man who had disappeared. One night, he had reported strange occurrences, claims that people had seen him in places he had never been, that his voice had come over the radio when he hadn't been on patrol. Then one night, he vanished. His last known transmission? Something's out here. It looks like me. The final encounter. Matt knew he had to confront it, so he did the one thing that every instinct told him not to do. He went back to the same trail where he had first seen it. It was past midnight, the park wrapped in a heavy fog. The silence was suffocating. Then he heard it. A voice. His own voice. "You shouldn't be here." Matt turned his flashlight toward the sound, and there it was, standing 10 feet away. An exact replica of him. Same uniform, same stance, same face. But it was smiling. A horrible, knowing smile. Matt forced his voice to stay steady. "What do you want?" The thing tilted its head. "To take your place." Matt's breath hitched. The thing stepped forward. Matt took a step back. And then it lunged. But just as it moved, something changed. The air around it flickered like a heat mirage. For a split second, its face changed. No longer his. Something else. Something inhuman. Then it was gone. Matt stood there panting, staring at the empty space where it had been. The only evidence left behind? A single boot print in the dirt, a boot print identical to his own. He left that trail and never walked it again. And to this day, some nights, when the radio crackles to life, when a voice, his own voice, whispers through the static, he turns it off and pretends he never heard it.